Greetings, friends. We're in a little sort of early summertime, late spring, early summertime series in our Wednesday or any other day Bible study where I'm asking interesting people, someone inside our church and someone outside, what in the Bible has been mattering to you lately? These are great conversations for me. It's always interesting where people's minds have landed. This week, I reached out to a longtime friend, Will Willimon. Will was a pastor in South Carolina. Then he was dean of Duke Chapel for many, many years, was elected a bishop in Alabama. He's come back and still teaching in Duke Divinity School. He has authored like over 100 books, which is amazing. And a few years back, Time magazine named him one of the 10 most effective preachers in America. So Will's amazing, and he's always funny and interesting. And I reached out to him, and then I thought also I would talk to our own Reverend Taylor Pryde Barefoot. And I hope you'll enjoy these two conversations about things in the Bible and why they matter. So welcome, Will Willimon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, James. Wonderful to be here.
It's Gosh, we've known each other a long time, and I just want to thank you for, you've written a lot, you've taught, you were dean of Duke Chapel, you were a bishop, now you're still teaching, and you've done so much to inspire and empower and mentor clergy like me. And we're just grateful for your long-time ministry.
Thank you.
Big impact you've had on Christendom, really. It's been great. So thank you for that.
Thank you, and thank Myers Park for doing well in this time. You're a beacon for many.
You always do things with good humor. I thought about this recently. I was reading Kate Bowler's new book, and I think she's got You in the Office, and she refers to Vanna White, which reminded me of the funny piece she wrote a while back about being Vanna's pastor. And Vanna lost her dad recently.
Yeah. Hubert.
Which I only know because Chip, Vanna's brother, is in our church.
Yeah, well, I'm glad Chip is there, but he was in my church youth group
back at North Myrtle Beach back in the day. Wow. So Will, tell us what in the Bible has been mattering to you lately and why?
Well, sometimes when I meet with clergy, with preachers, they'll ask me, what are your spiritual disciplines, or how do you keep at it, or how do you keep alive in ministry over the long haul? And I've had a long haul. And I say scripture, the Bible. And one of the joys of being a pastor is on a weekly basis, I go to the text. Of course, I try to go to the text on a daily basis in my own devotions and all, but on a weekly basis, you go there and you open up this ancient book, the newest portions of it, 2,000 years old, written in a culture is quite so different from our own. And you say, hey, got a word, any word from the Lord? Got something to say? And I can just testify that after nearly 5 decades of preaching, I'm just amazed at Scripture's ability to surprise. Like I'm a lectionary preacher normally, and that means I've been through the 3-year cycle of Revised Common Lectionary like
many times,
20 times nearly. And so these texts keep coming back up, but I'm still capable of being shocked by a text. And I think that is such a compliment to Scripture. And it is just a kind of inexhaustible resource, a renewable resource. And I just find the Bible continues to be the most interesting literature I know of, and for reasons known only to the Lord. Our God chooses to speak to us through this ancient book, and does.
I've seen more than one of your students over time be teaching or preaching, and they're trying to say something that's hard for people to hear, and they say, you know, what Will says, like you hold up the Bible and you say, I don't like it any more than you do, but there it is.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's important for us preachers to let people know that, hey, we're fellow strugglers with Scripture. We all stand under Scripture and its judgments. And as you know, Scripture is kind of harder on clergy than it is on laity, the priest, etc. Um, but it is. I know when I'm studying the Bible for preaching, it I'm just continually impressed with its difference, its oddness. It's that here, and I think this is in the American context. I think most of us kind of think of religion, spirituality as something that comes out of you. Uh, People will say, I've been searching, and this church really does seem to align with where I am spiritually, and etc. No, the Bible is, is I love what Martin Luther called Scripture, the gospel, the verbum externum, the external word. That is a word that does not come out of you. It doesn't come through you. It comes to you. It is something that you stumble upon. That is very meaningful to me, and I think uh, I remember James Sanders, the great Old Testament interpreter, saying, you know, if you read a biblical passage and you say to yourself, yeah, 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 that's what I've always thought, or yeah, that certainly makes sense of my experience. Read it again. You probably got it wrong.
I've kidded with people, and you know what I'm talking about. When I first started preaching a long time ago, if people wanted to pay me the highest possible compliment for a sermon, they would say, James, you stepped on my toes today. Now nobody says that. Now if somebody wants to pay me a compliment, they say, I agree with you. That's a sea change.
Interesting. That's an interesting way of putting it. And I think we maybe are in a moment where we come expecting that we think that's our job, like in listening to a sermon. We say, okay, yeah, agreed. And sometimes we preachers imply that in the way we preach. I mean, listen to us begin a sermon by saying, have you ever thought that? Haven't you found it true that? Well, I think Scripture keeps saying, hey, I'm not trying to speak to your human experience. I'm trying to give you an experience you wouldn't have had you not opened this ancient book. And I remember a Duke student saying to me, we talk about worship at Duke Chapel. And she said, well, you know, it's just Duke Chapel's weird on Sunday mornings. It's weird. And I said, oh, what's weird about it? That we sing Latin anthems or it's a big, dark, Gothic building? She said, well, the weirdest part is like, you know, when that person brings in that great big book, and I said, the Bible? And said, yeah. You know, in the opening parade, I said, the processional? And said, yeah. Anyway, I watch her, and she brings it up there and puts it up there on the stand and then opens it up and then looks around at the pastors and says, okay, work from this. And said, that's weird. That's not happening all over Durham. And I said, thank you. I had almost forgotten how weird it is for a group of progressive 21st century people to gather on a regular basis, open up this ancient book and say, hey, let's all make believe that these ancient Jews know more about God than we do. Let's just try that out and see where we are by noon. That is weird.
I like the way you phrased that at the beginning. You know, haven't you always thought that the meek are blessed? Haven't you always thought that somebody strikes you on one cheek and the other?
Yeah. Nobody's, yeah. And, you know, when we preachers talk about connecting with people's world and where they live, you know, I'm afraid the Bible is a bit more aggressive than that. I think the Bible wants to rock your world. I think Scripture wants to remake my world so that after I encounter Scripture, or maybe better, after I'm encountered by Scripture, I'm I come away different. And I love those moments when people come out. I remember one Sunday I preached on, you know, the Philippians, the kenosis hymn, that though he was that he was the beginning of all things. So I preached on the pre-existence of Christ, and I said, but when the world was created, Christ was there. Christ created the world. He's the Trinity. He is not an afterthought of God. He is God. And I went along those lines. Well, it was over. A couple of my older members came out, older members of the congregation, and said that I couldn't make any sense of that, or I've been a Christian all my life, and I've never heard that idea preached before. That I just have never heard that. And they seemed almost offended. Well, a couple of students came out, and the first student said, "Man, that is weird stuff." Said, "We get to believe that?" And I said, "Yeah, you can believe that." And said, "That's great." Said, "I mean, that's like Mormons and stuff. That's weird." And someone else came out and said, "Wow, you know, so much stuff around here is, you know, recycling the stuff you already know." Said, "I today have encountered some completely new information. Thank you." So maybe that kind of openness and all is a good thing.
Let me ask you one last question. Somebody asked me this the other day, and it kind of pressed me a little. So the question was, you know, you read a text in the Bible and you're coming up with a sermon. They said, how's that different from when you read it and it's just like for you? I mean, I remember somewhere Thomas Merton said something about the peril of being a priest is if you learn something about God, you immediately hand it off to somebody else instead of taking it into yourself, right? So what do you think?
Yeah.
How's that different when like guys like you and I, we read Scripture for us?
Well, I think in my own personal reading of Scripture, I'm busy maybe applying it to myself. Maybe I'm busy expecting maybe a more personal word addressed to me. When I'm reading for preaching, I'm engaging in what I remember Lee Kecht called priestly listening. I'm listening in behalf of God's people. And therefore, having heard many of your sermons, I bet you're like this, and that is, in a sense, I go to Scripture, and I go with 30 or 40 people in the room with me at the time, and so I read like Jesus talking about divorce. I had that text this fall at the Iona monastery in Scotland, so Jesus says, "Hey, Moses let us divorce. Is that okay?" And Jesus says, No. That from the beginning it's not so. And you shouldn't get remarried after divorce and all. Well, when I go to a text like that and I say, "Okay, I'm clean. I'm okay. My marriage is still intact." Well, no. When I go as a pastor, I go and I see Mary Smith, who has finally gotten up the courage to leave an abusive marriage. I see John and Jane, who have, after marriage failure, later in life have found each other, and I have married them. And anyway, I kind of think, so I think that's good that I go to Scripture as a pastor, as a preacher, in service to the community, hoping that I'll be able to stand up on Sunday and share with them what I've discovered. or what has been revealed to me. And by the way, with your preaching, I find that kind of your shtick that you seem to love to kind of, and I think it's one reason makes your preaching interesting, is kind of like, hey, Myers Park, guess what I discovered this week? And I think I get this image from Tom Long that says the preacher is like goes into the Bible the way you might enter a dark cave with a flashlight, and your light falls on the walls and then on the floor, and you see a stalactite, and then you see some markings on the wall, and then you're shocked, and you run back out of the cave, waving the flashlight and saying to everybody, "Hey, people, guess what I just found? Come on in, follow me." So I like that.
That's great. That's well put. Will, thank you so much for taking time and sharing.
Well, thank you, James, and thank you for being a teacher. I think a lot of people can benefit from your own expertise in Scripture, but thank you for being able to share that through your teaching with your congregation. I'm sure they're grateful.
Well, you're kind, Will, and you take care. We hope we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, good.
Peace to you.
And with you.
Well, Taylor Pryde Barefoot, welcome to our Bible study.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Oh gosh, thanks for joining us. We're talking to various people, some inside the church, some outside the church, about something in the Bible that's been mattering to you lately. And so go tell us, like, what's been mattering to you lately?
Yeah, so I'm actually choosing one that's pretty well known, but one that kind of created new meaning for me recently. And it was the feeding of the 5,000 from specifically the Matthew account. So Matthew chapter 14. I was less about the crowd when this text kind of spoke to my heart in a new way, and more about the disciples and Jesus. They had just received the news that John the Baptist had been killed. And I imagine that incited a lot of grief and probably fear and anxiety about what that meant for them and their ministry.
We're next.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was thinking a lot about them and how they felt. And then they get to this crowd and everybody's like Jesus had already kind of made a plan. I want to retreat. I need some time alone. I need to rest. And then the crowd is there and they're asking, like, we're hungry, we need you. And I'm sure the disciples were just like, not again. Like, can I please just have some time off? And Jesus says, no, like, we're gonna take care of these people. And that came in a pretty personal moment in my life. I had my first experience of ministry that I would like maybe label as getting towards burnout. My husband's grandfather passed away. And when you're a pastor and you're pastoring people and when their grief all the time, but then you have your own grief, it felt a little too heavy for me. And I kind of felt like those disciples and Jesus a little bit, where I was like, can I just have this break? Can I retreat? Can I go away? But Sunday morning came. He died on a Saturday, and I remembered that Sunday morning just not even being able to like answer honestly, like, how was your weekend? And just kind of faking it because duty called. And so that meant a lot to me, to just a reminder that sometimes you just have to do it. But the end of the story is there's these baskets left over for the disciples, and they get to experience the miracle. And I definitely had that experience in that season of ministry where, I showed up to things I didn't want to, but experienced God's grace and was cared for by our people, and ultimately was grateful that I did keep showing up and that it wasn't time just yet to get away. So that was a pretty foundational experience at this stage in my ministry for me.
Yeah, the disciples they tend to come off as kind of bumbling, slow to pick up on things, and there's some of that. But to cut them a break, what they're doing is hard. They've left their livelihood behind. They're traipsing around. They don't know where they're going. They don't know how the story's going to end. John the Baptist is killed. They got to be thinking, holy smoke, I wish I were back in my fishing business, right? And they can probably see it across the water, right? So this happens by the Sea of Galilee. They're probably thinking, I wish I were fishing. I just thought about that. And I love it's one of those, one of the times I first years ago thought about read the Bible slowly. So a friend of mine preached on this, and I saw his sermon, and the disciples come to Jesus and say, we have these people and they're hungry. And what Jesus' response isn't, okay, I'll work a miracle. Jesus says, you give them something to eat. I had never noticed that. I thought it before. You get, I'm sure they're like, what?
I know. Yeah.
It's, and then of course people love the little kid with the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He's got his lunchbox that his mom sent with him. There's got to be something in that even if you only have a little to offer, God can do good things with the little that probably when you felt weary, exhausted, you only had a little to offer, but God can really honor and use that, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think I've had like so many moments in ministry already where just the mere presence of showing up was like, okay, I can physically be here is all I can do at this moment. But there is so many times where God uses you in those moments and gives you strength that you didn't know you had, or maybe gives you the answer you didn't know you could come up with, or just that peace that you need to be that calm presence and not even say anything. So yeah, I constantly am reminded about how little I am actually bringing and how much God actually shows up in the process, which has been a beautiful part of being at Myers Park and the grace of people around me in those moments.
Well, you bring a lot of grace to us. I mean, I found in preaching, the more you preach, you'll probably discover the same thing. I've had weeks that it was just like family-wise, it was a stressful week. I had to travel. I was exhausted. So Sunday morning, I'm thinking, this ain't much. And people are like, their lives are changed. Like, how did that happen? And then other weeks, like I have worked, I have prepared. I think this is going to be a winner. And people just, their eyes glaze over. It's amazing. I do like the baskets left over. Right? You think I preached on this at Duke Chapel years ago, and I thought about if Jesus, the way we think about hungry people, right? It's like, let's give them just kind of the bare minimum that they need to get by, right? But Jesus doesn't do that. And he doesn't, you think if he were miraculous, he'd calculate, here's exactly the amount that 5,000 will need. But he doesn't do that. It's like he overshoots the goal. And there are all these baskets that are left over. And it might be symbolic of all kinds of things. But to me, I think Sam Wells, used to be at Duke Chapel. He talked about this, that with God, there's always an abundance. And we get confused about that, right? Because we think the abundance is, I'll have more money, I'll have more of it's more worldly stuff. That's not the abundance, but it's the abundance of mercy, the abundance of presence, the abundance even of joy that people can experience I mean, you probably found this, right? The death of Cade's grandfather and other losses that you've had, there's kind of there's a weird, surprising overflow of joy.
Yes, absolutely. And within this week, like this exhausting week or I guess it was maybe 2 weeks at this point of ministry, our church also experienced the horrific death of a young person. And that funeral was on a Saturday, and I was exhausted after that funeral, like just emotionally depleted. And I had another work commitment at 6 p.m. And I remembered I took a nap, and I remembered saying to Kate, I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I physically don't know if I can do this. And he's like, just like one step at a time. So I dragged my carcass of a body to this work event at 6 p.m. and it was artists. It was young people doing slam poetry. The name is escaping me of the organization, but it was
Playing for others.
yes, playing for others. And it was that experience of abundance. I had not felt my heart so full and so filled with hope and just like closeness with God at hearing like such incredible truth. And I like couldn't even fall asleep that night, even though I was so tired because I was so energized and filled up with the goodness of that event. And it was totally those 12 baskets because it was like you said, it was complete abundance coming from a place where I just was hoping to survive. Like I really just wanted to like make it through those 3 hours of work, and not let anyone know that I was completely in another place. But God had something else in mind.
And some you probably hope you haven't got much of this yet. There's some people, I preach or do whatever I do, and they feel some divine obligation to give me grief about it. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'll always respond by saying it's harder than it looks.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to say sometimes when that happens is like, I had a really rotten night last night.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's not that I want to do that. I want everybody to remember that all these people in our orbit, I get frustrated with drivers.
Yep.
You see somebody and they're not very friendly to you,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And we tend to think, what's wrong with that person? Or we think, what's wrong with me? But
Yep.
the old ACEs training, right? Instead of saying, what's wrong with you? We ask, what happened to
Yep.
you? All the time we're around people. Something terrible happened last night. Their husband said, I never really loved you. Who knows what happened?
Mm-hmm.
And it's exhausting. And it's not exhausting like you need a nap or a vacation. It's existentially exhausting. And just always to have mercy on the people around us and with ourselves.
Yes.
There are times that you're just weary. You're not Superman to keep going, always being tough and strong. Some American ideal. I love it that you lifted up this thing about the disciples. I hadn't thought about it that way before, and I think it's like really interesting that they probably did have fear. They had been out in the middle of nowhere for a long time. There had to be some weariness, not just the hungry people in front of them.
Yeah.
So that's super interesting, Taylor. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.